Hello, thank you for watching my channel today. My name's Sarah and my channel is called Your True Shelf. And today I am filming my wrap up for July. Not too bad on timekeeping this month, a little bit better than last month. It was a bit of a medium month in July. I've seen lots of people say that, I don't know why, but July wasn't like an amazing reading month in the same way that June was for me. I read 7 books, so okay, but not amazing. What I did do is read the oldest book on my TBR, which will be up shortly. But the first book I want to talk about, I'm just going to do them in chronological order like normal. The first book I read was Elena Knows by Claudia Piñero. This book has been really quite hyped on BookTube. I've seen loads of people give this 5 stars and really love this book. And I am not one of them. I'm sorry, this is going to be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I didn't love this book like I was hoping I would. I think I learned stuff from this book. So it's basically about Elena, who is a woman in her 60s who has Parkinson's, and the woman's daughter, who I forget her name, she has been found hanging from the church bell tower, like committing suicide, and Elena just absolutely refuses to believe that she's committed suicide, so she decides that the police aren't really taking this seriously. She's going to look into it herself, and it's set over the course of a day. I think it's a day, it might be like 2 days, I'm pretty sure it's a day, and the chapters are named, or the sections are named after the timing of her Parkinson's meds. So with Parkinson's, you have to take medication, usually about 5 times a day. And it's really important to take it at set times, because when your medication starts running out, your Parkinson's symptoms will come back and you won't be able to mobilise very well and stuff. So it's really important that you take it, but it does, because it's frequently throughout the day, it's very like your day has to be kind of planned around your medication, and it really does capture that well in this book. It also captures so well like things like Elena is really hunched over, like she's quite bent forward, she can't lift her head up, and so she finds it really hard to see where she's going, and she finds it hard to eat and drink without food and drink coming back out of her mouth, and she dribbles, and her daughter keeps telling to her, like, because there's lots of flashbacks to her time with her daughter, and her daughter's always like, Mum, that's really disgusting, Mum, you need to put like something around your neck, it's like nobody wants to see that, like, and she kind of is very much like giving these really like very harsh things to her mum, which her mum has no control over. And you realise, like, from Elena's point of view, how embarrassing it is for her that those things are happening to her and that she can't help them, and like she can't cut her toenails and she can't do stuff like that, and her daughter's always like, Mum, this is really disgusting. And it kind of really gives a perspective on what it's like for Elena day to day living with a condition which stops her from doing things that she would have done without thinking previously. And so there's this kind of difficult relationship between her and her daughter, which we see, and we see, like you say, her perspective on everything. But I just didn't really like the actual story, the story about her daughter, and did she hang herself or didn't she hang herself? And it wasn't really about that, to be honest. It was more just about what it was like for Elena living day to day and grieving for her daughter, and about her relationship with her daughter. And all of that on paper sounds good, but it didn't click with me, and so I just didn't really enjoy reading it. But I think I am in the minority there, because most people love that book. The second book I read was the longest book on my TBR. This is like a very old edition. This is The Horse Whisperer by Nicholas Eben. So I have 3 books which I've owned since 2013 and haven't read. This is one of them, and it was one of my goals for my reading year was to read all 3 books by the end of the year. So I've read the first one, and this is quite a long book. It's about 500 pages. I loved the film when I saw the film, and this is one that started quite promisingly. I was reading it out in the garden. It was a really good story. I was really into like the whole scene at the beginning where there's the big accident. It was like horrific to read, but I was really getting into it. And then it just kind of, it was too long. I think it needs editing down quite a bit. I felt like I would read it for half an hour or an hour, and I wouldn't be any further forward in pages than I was when I started. Obviously I was. It just felt like, oh, I've still got this many pages to go. Like I hadn't just been reading it for an hour. So there were some bits that I really enjoyed, and there were some bits which were really boring. There were some really, really badly written sex scenes in this book. Like, I was thinking initially this might be quite a nice more of a YA book, and then there were all these random sex scenes in there which were like really cringe, really embarrassingly written. They were completely unnecessary to the story. Like, I don't know why they were in there. They didn't add anything. They just made you kind of go, when you're reading them, because they were just done really badly. And yeah, so there were bits that I liked of this story. There were lots of bits I didn't like, and there were lots of slow bits. So overall, it was kind of like a 3.25 star book. But I've read it. One of the other books that I've got on my TBR of those three oldest ones is another book by Nicholas Evans, and I'm not sure that I'm going to read it. I might just unhaul it, to be honest, because it is about wolves. So that's why I've still got it, because it's something about the wolf population. I really like wolves, so I'm not sure. I might try a chapter or something. But yeah, this was a bit of a fail, but I've read it and it's now going to be donated to a charity shop. So that's good. The next book I read, I really loved. So the next book I read was Proof of Heaven by Dr. Eben Alexander, which is a book that my friend Hannah lent me. I've wanted to read it for absolutely ages, and it's basically, so Dr. Alexander is an eminent neurosurgeon in America, and he one day becomes like really, really sick really quickly, and he has bacterial meningitis. Within a really short time, he's in a coma. He's in intensive care. He's in a coma for a long time, or many days, and every day the doctors are saying to his family, look, like, the odds are getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer, and they're pretty much at the point where they're going to turn off life support when he starts to make a recovery. But there's elements of that throughout the book, that story, which I found obviously interesting because I'm a doctor. But the other massive part of the story is what's happening to him whilst he's in a coma. So he has a near-death experience, an out-of-body experience, however you want to describe it. He is a person who, whenever patients told him that had happened to them, he was like, yeah, okay, whatever you say. He was really cynical. He kind of was always trying to find a scientific explanation for why that couldn't be possible and what was going on in the brain and all of those kind of things. And then this happens to him, and he has this, like, he describes everything in huge detail of what happened to him, and I absolutely loved reading it. It's a subject which I find fascinating and really comforting as well, and I loved reading about his experience, everything that happened to him. I am not cynical about those things at all. Like, I fully believe in those things, but yeah, his experience was wonderful. And then when he came around and he started recovering, he really wanted to tell everyone about this experience. And his son said, write everything down that you can remember before you start looking at other people's experiences, because then you might confuse what your experience was with other people's experience. So write everything down. And then he makes like this, he spends a really long time, this isn't all detailed in the book, but he spends a lot of his time afterwards examining other people's experiences, researching it. He's opened like a research centre now about this whole issue, and he goes into, at the appendices at the end, he goes into different theories that are postulated about what happens scientifically in a near-death experience and why those things can't be correct, which is quite interesting, about different theories about the brain and stuff. And yeah, so he's opened a whole research unit into this now, and so I just found it incredible and fascinating. The writing isn't like, it's quite simple writing, which I think makes it really accessible. So I gave it 4.5 stars. I just found it really comforting and really lovely, and I loved it. Then I listened to a classic on Audible. I listened to Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. I have read Sons and Lovers and Women in Love. Or was it The Rainbow? The Rainbow. Sons and Lovers and The Rainbow with my friend Jo. We buddy read both of those in the past, and Lady Chatterley's Lover was free on Audible, and I just fancied listening to it. It's written a lot later than the other two Lawrences that I've read, and obviously there's a lot of scandal surrounding this book. I was expecting it to be like really quite tame because of the time period it was written, you know, like 100 years ago. I thought, well, you know, what was considered scandalous then isn't going to be considered scandalous now. But it was actually a very explicit. I wasn't expecting that. I was thinking it was going to kind of hint at sex, but it was actually like graphic. But did I enjoy this book? In parts. Basically the premise of this book is that we're following Constance Chatterley, who has married her husband, who is a baron, I think, and he comes back from the first he comes back from the First World War. And he has been injured, and he's now, I think, paralysed from the chest down. It's never sort of completely explained, but I think he's paralysed from the chest down. And he can't have sex, and he can't, therefore, father an heir. And so he kind of says to Connie, if you want to, you can have an affair, and we'll pretend that the baby's mine and that we managed to have children. And so he sort of says that quite early on to her. She's in this house, which is like his sort of family estate, which is described as being quite oppressive. And her life is quite boring. Like, she doesn't really have much in the way of friends. Her family, her dad is like, she doesn't have a mum. I think her mum's died. Her sister is around a bit. Her dad is quite progressive, in his views, and basically she's kind of cooped up in this place. She's a carer to her husband. There's lots of things she has to do for him every day, so her whole day is kind of around his routines. Clifford, that's his name, her husband. And just getting a bit depressed, really, and she's going to go on this trip abroad, and they're kind of thinking, well, she can have an affair abroad, and then she can get pregnant, she can come back, people won't know what happened and everything. So they get this nurse in to look after Clifford while she's going to be away. And the nurse, because the nurse comes first, the nurse kind of allows her time to be freed up enough that she's not constantly having to care for her husband, and she starts going for sort of walks and stuff around the grounds. And there's a groundsman called Mellors who looks after like the pheasants and stuff like that. And he's the lover that basically in the book. So she starts having an affair with Mellors, and yeah, it goes from there basically. So I don't know. It was a bit slow at times. Did I really like the characters? Not particularly. And for me, I kind of have to have some characters that I sort of like and relate to find good enjoyment from the book. There were too many penis descriptions and they weren't very flattering ones either, which I didn't quite feel that there needed to be quite so many descriptions in the book. But overall, I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought it was good, but I'm glad I've read it, but it wasn't like one that I think so far my favourite book of his definitely was Sons and Lovers, which was a lot better, I felt. Then I read another book which is super popular on BookTube, and it is Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. This is the third book I've read. No, I've read Babel. That was the first book I read by her, and then I've got The Poppy World, but I haven't read it yet. So this is the second of her books that I've read. I wanted to read it whilst it was still kind of, a popular thing on BookTube, and not wait for ages till I read it. So this is an interesting book. I'm not going to go over it loads because lots of people have already reviewed it, but basically we have Athena Liu, who is Chinese American. She is very successful as an author, and she is friends with Juniper Song, and Juniper is not the nicest person. She is a white woman who is also trying to be an author. She's nowhere near as successful as Athena, but they're friends, but they're not like they kind of hang out together, but they're not really like close or anything. And one day when they're hanging out together, Athena starts choking, and she ends up choking to death right at the beginning of the book. And Juniper goes into her bedroom and sees that she has a full manuscript of her next book on her desk, which has been typed, and she decides that she's going to take it and tells herself initially that she's going to release, tweak it a little bit, edit it a little bit, and then release it as Athena Lou's last book. But actually she just starts passing it off as her own book. And it's about Chinese people and their experience in the Second World War, Chinese labourers, and how their sort of contribution to the war has been sort of written out of history and stuff. And so everyone's kind of like, this is an unusual topic for you to be interested in. And she basically starts spinning this whole complicated web of lies about the book. And there were lots of rumours on social media about why, because this book is a huge success. There's a lot of things on social media where people are thinking, is this really your work? Like, did you really do this? And there's a lot of stuff about race in publishing in this book. So what it's like to be an Asian author in the modern publishing industry. And also, like, Juniper does a lot of, like, performative activism in this book to try and kind of appease her guilt and do things for the Chinese community. But she's doing it really completely not from where... she's not doing it in the right way. She's doing it all to kind of make herself look better. And there also is an issue that the publishers rebrand Juniper to make her ethnically ambiguous, is how they call it, so that it looks like she might actually have wanted to write this book. So there's lots of really difficult things talked about in this, and I found it all really interesting. Again, it's a book which doesn't have likeable characters, and for that reason I didn't feel like it was incredible. But I felt like it's a very intelligent book. I found that I love her writing style. I found it very compulsive, like I wanted to keep reading and keep reading. So it's quite a quick read. I didn't love it as much as Babel, definitely. Babel was amazing. This one I gave it 4.5 stars at the time. I'd probably give it 4 stars now, whereas Babel was a 5. But I'm still glad that I read it. Then I read a graphic novel which I saw Sarah Freshley talk about. I will link her channel down below. I love her channel. If you don't subscribe, please watch her. She talked about this book called Ducks by Kate Beaton, which is a graphic novel subtitled 2 Years in the Oil Sands. And this is a graphic novel about, so it's an autobiographical book, and it's about Kate's time where she lives in remote Canada, and people are having to leave the islands where they live to go to their sort of cities to try and find work, and it's taking people from their communities where they don't want to leave. And she's got lots of student debts to pay off, and she decides, like a lot of people, to go and work in the oil fields to try and make a lot of money, because you have to live there. It's very long hours. You have to live on site in accommodation, which isn't very nice, and all of that kind of thing. And she is one of the only women on the oil fields, and she is treated so badly in terms of constant sexual harassment, sexual assault. Just the whole time she's being talked to like a sexual object, and by all the men. And she's kind of I think she's kind of saying as well that the men aren't all bad guys, but they've been taken away from their families. They're put into this environment which is an unnatural environment, and it kind of changes who they are as a person. I don't know if I don't know if that's what she's saying. That's one of the things that's postulated in the book. I don't want to put words into her mouth, especially given the experiences that she had, and these are her own experiences. There are lots of trigger warnings for sexual assault in this book, but it talks about her experiences, and because it's a graphic novel, it's done so well. It's quite a big graphic novel. It took me a few days to read. Normally you can sort of read a graphic novel in an hour, but this one took a lot longer, and I think it's important to sort of savor it as well, because she's saying a lot of important things and you don't want to kind of just read it really quickly. So it's a sad and difficult book. It examines what it does to people to take them out of their home environment, away from their families, in this kind of very tricky living situation, how it changes people and how it impacts on the people who are hit by it, like she is. So that one I gave 4 stars. And then the last book was one that I read for the Women's World Cup readathon. So this is basically where you get drawn a country at the beginning of the World Cup. So I was drawn Switzerland. You stay with that country until they lose, and then you become the other country that knocked your country out. So the first book, I needed to read a book from Switzerland, a Swiss author, and this book was on my TBR, and this is Heidi by Johanna Spyri. So I got this because look how gorgeous it is. I've had it on my TBR for a little while. I loved this when I was a kid. I think I had an abridged version on audio when I was a kid, and I used to listen to it all the time, and I just loved this story. So I'm sure we all know the story. Like, Heidi is taken to her grandfather, who is known as Uncle Alp. He lives a very isolated existence in the Alps. He's fallen out with the local community. They all see him as kind of scary and wayward. And one day he has to suddenly look after I think she's his great niece, Heidi. And Heidi comes to live with him, and she thrives in this environment. He becomes really close with her. She loves being in the mountains. She loves the freedom. She loves hanging out with Peter, who's the local goat herd, and looking after the goats. She finds so much wonder in the flowers and the nature and the people who, Peter's family, who she gets really close to. And then one day her aunt takes her away and makes her go and live in a town where there's a really wealthy family who want Heidi to be a companion for their daughter Clara. Clara is disabled and she's in a wheelchair, and they want Heidi to be her companion. And Heidi hates it because whilst she loves Clara, she misses their nature. She doesn't want to be in a town, and she gets more and more kind of depressed and ill, and the doctor recommends that she should go back home. And and then it's about how Heidi's life and the life of Clara and her family sort of merge and what they learn from each other. So it's a really heartwarming, lovely story, and I gave that one 4 stars. So that was my reading month of July. So I would say the best book I read probably was Proof of Heaven. And yeah, I had some really good ones. Like Proof of Heaven was good, Yellowface was really good, Ducks was really good, Heidi, and then the others were a bit of a miss for me. Yeah, so they're the books that I read in the month of July. Let me know your thoughts on those, or any books that you read in July that you want to recommend for me. I hope that you're having a really lovely week, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.